Do you have a big plan?
Yes, I got a big plan. I'm going to be leaving the world soon.
No. Before you leave,
okay.
before you leave.
That's my big plan.
No, because you're doing valuable work. Do you have a plan of how we could make civilization better, more humane?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Education. Quite simply, read and study and turn off the television, turn off all this silly nonsense of government, and it's just incredible nonsense. And start educating yourself. The United States federal government is a privately owned company. It's a corporation.
The whole government.
Of course, it's a private. It's like General Motors, Ford Motor Company, Sears. It's a privately owned. But see, most people don't understand. The United States government is a corporation. It is a privately owned company.
Who owns it?
Oh, well, that's different. Now you're getting now.
I'm asking the right
now you're asking the right question.
Right.
So there's a world of difference between the United States and the word United States of America.
Oh, really?
United States of America is a republic. It's based on the bringing together of 48 separate countries. Each state in this union is a separate country.
Okay.
And so you're crossing over from California to Nevada is like crossing over from France to Spain.
Right.
And so you can't do things in Nevada you can do in California. So you can't do things in New York that you can do in Florida.
The United States is the recognition of separate countries, but the United States of America means...
Those are United States. So, but each one's a state, like the state of Virginia is like the state of Israel.
Right.
It's a country. It's referred to as a state.
And
as a matter of fact, you know, there's a world of difference between. There's a world of difference in words in law. I mean, when you go to court, there's a very big difference between a trial by jury or a jury trial. Doesn't mean the same thing. There's a very big difference between California state and the state of California. Doesn't mean the same thing.
It doesn't?
No.
Like, what's the difference there?
Cal State is the state. We call California. That's the state. But state of California is different. That has nothing to do with California. That's the federal government operating within the confines of the state of California. So anytime you see the state of, that means it's a federal corporation operating within California. But California is called Cal State. That's why you have California State University, California State this, and California State. That's California. But state of California is the federal government.
Do people know this? Do
No.
lawyers know this?
People don't know any of this. None of this. Nobody, because it doesn't have anything to do with football. So who the hell needs to know about any of this stuff? I need to know, because I don't like being played for a fool.
Yeah.
I want to know who's running this country.
You don't want to be manipulated.
I refuse to be manipulated. I want to know exactly who's doing what. I want to know how they're doing it, and how are they messing with my mind and my money and my family. So I want to know. 99% of people I run into, they couldn't care less as long as the beer's cold and football's on. They don't care.
But when people vote for like a president, what is happening?
You go to the polls. What is a poll? I mean, a poll is when you take a consensus of the people. Which one of these fruitcakes do you want to bow down to and give your money to? Do you want this group ball here, or that airhead here, or this ding-a-ling over here?
Right.
We just want to know the basic concepts. Which one do you people like?
It obviously doesn't seem to matter.
They all work for me, so it doesn't matter. But to make you people happy, would you rather have a woman over here? Would you rather have a black guy? Or would you rather have this old white man? Which one would you like?
Nothing changes. You mean Obama says...
It doesn't matter, because I own them all anyway.
Right.
It's just business. Come on, this is a mob.
Well, who is the mob?
We're talking the mafia here. We're talking the underworld.
Who are these people? You know, the Illuminati,
Just business, nothing personal. Don't take this personal.
But there's someone behind it. That's key.
Oh, you bet there is.
Yeah.
But they're in Europe.
They are.
Yeah.
Capitus Diminutio Maxima. If you don't have any idea what that is, you need to find out. You need to look. Capitus Diminutio Maxima, the highest, most comprehensive loss of status. This occurred when a man's condition was changed from one of freedom to one of bondage, and when he became a slave. So you might want to pull out your driver's license or your social security card, the SS card, social insurance number, and take a look at Capitus Diminutio Maxima. You also might want to look at this. Let's just I want you to see this, so I'm just typing it in here. We're going to go to images. Okay. So this is on a birth certificate for Canada, and you'll see that it's actually printed like by a company called the Canadian Banknote Company. This is one from the American Banknote Company. This is an American birth certificate. So the question is what is a bank? Here's another one. What is a bank doing issuing birth certificates? What are they doing printing birth certificates? And who is their partner? Could be an all capital letter state. Yeah, it's not the state of love or a state of happiness. It's the state of whatever, government state they want to say you live in. Although a state is just a government state is just a piece of paper. It's imaginary. It doesn't exist except in a filing cabinet somewhere. So, anyways, these guys are capitalizing on people, turning people into money, and I want you to see another one of these. Well, this one's good for right now. Get this and let's wake the people up.
Hey everybody, what we're talking about today is how a US citizen is a slave, okay? And so let's get going. This is the first section of the 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States are subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. And see my video, the so-called 14th Amendment's unconstitutional, and that will talk about how it's unconstitutional, and my video on the U.S. citizens are enemies of the state. This is taken from Congressional Record, June 13, 1967, page 15,641 through 15,646. A citizen of the United States is a civilly dead entity operating as co-trustee and co-beneficiary of the public charitable trust, the constructive cesticate trust of U.S. Inc. under the 14th Amendment, which upholds the debt of the USA and USA Inc. And this is the D.C. Code, which is Chapter 3, Absence for 7 years, Section 252 and 253, which is located at 31 Stat 1230. And so at Section 252, presumption of death, if any person shall leave his domicile without any known intention of changing the same, and shall not return or be heard from for 7 years from the time of his so leaving, he shall be presumed to be dead. In any case where his death shall come in question, unless proof be made that he is alive within that time. And then if he's found living, the person presumed to be dead be found to have been living. Any person injured by such presumption shall be restored to the rights which he shall have been deprived by reason of such presumption. So the point being is that they presume you're dead. Okay, that's where the cesticate trust comes in. Capitus Diminutio, meaning the diminishing of status through the use of capitalization. In Roman law, abridgment of personality or loss or curtailment of a man's status or aggregate of legal attributes and qualifications. Capitus Diminutio Maxima, meaning a maximum loss of status through the use of capitalization, the highest and most comprehensive loss of status. This occurred when a man's condition was changed from one of freedom to one of bondage, when he became a slave. Why do you think they're spelling your name in all block capital letters, idiot? That's Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. Classification of persons. The Roman law distinguished 3 kinds of personal status or degree of legal capacity and classified human beings with respect thereto as follows. And we don't talk about that here, but I wanted to point out that this Law of Persons, written by Joseph R. Long, is talking about Roman law. Okay, the Law of Persons is Roman law. And then in section 3, it says Capitus Diminutio Maxima. A Roman citizen could not legally be sold in slavery, but he might become a slave by condemnation for crime or by being captured by an enemy, okay? These Satanist pigs are your enemy. They're making war on you.
Because this is another game changer. Potential, anyway. Did you know in 1979 the term person was redefined as a variety of entities other than human beings? Oops. 1979. The term person was redefined as a variety of entities other than human beings. Check it out yourself. Did you know the US Treasury was officially closed in 1921 and transferred all their duties over to the Federal Reserve banks? Currency printing. Did you know under the Constitution only gold and silver are declared as money? Currency is not money. Redeemable currency must promise to pay in gold or silver coins. Did you know the Federal Reserve notes are essentially unsigned checks? Think about that. Here's the kicker. Did you know you can only pay off a debt by using gold, silver, barter, or commodity? With Federal Reserve notes, you can only discharge a debt. Now, discharge is a way of paying off debt via a bankruptcy, remember. The debt is discharged, but they still own the asset, like the houses and the cars. So you've discharged your debt, not paid off your debt. You cannot pay off a debt with currency system. You can only pay off a debt with gold and silver coins. The Federal Reserve demanded that interest payments must be made in gold. So now you know why Fort Knox is empty. But there is no stipulation in the Federal Reserve Act to repay the principal, because technically there was no principal, is why. It's substitute money, it's fake. Did you know most Americans held free and clear alloidal titles until the Federal Reserve Act of 1913? They pledged, the Fed pledged all the property within America to the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, to which the trustees there then held the stock title, aka Rothschilds, aka Marduk. And because you can only discharge the debt with currency, they hold the lien of the debt until it's payable by gold and silver only, and subsequently they claim the title of your assets. Now, the US citizen is known as a tenant or a franchisee, and was registered as the beneficiary of the trust via their birth certificate. Then, in 1933, the Fed pledged all of the present and future properties, assets and labour of their now called subjects. Subject means a person under control or under dominion of another, to render submissive or a dependent, or to bind under the 14th Amendment, US citizen to the Federal Reserve. In return, the Federal Reserve, for pledging all the properties, that means everybody's house, business and everything, the Federal Reserve agreed to extend the US Corporation, which is the US government, now known as the US government, it's not, the US Corporation, all the credit, currency, which is substitute money, it needed. So they took all the assets and they gave pieces of paper. In return, the US Corporation, operating as a government, had to assign over all collateral and securities to the Fed as a condition of the loans. All collateral. In other words, the Fed owned the people. Now, the issue was the Federal Reserve never had any assets. None. For their support or to print the currency and back it. So where did their assets come from? They assigned the private property of all their subjects, or slaves is a better term, as collateral against the unpayable federal debt. Why is it unpayable? Because you need gold and silver to pay off the debt is why. Hence, the gold and silver heist from the American public announced in the same year, 1933, where it became illegal to own gold and silver, and so preventing any member of the public ever paying off the debt. So they would never have the asset. That's why it says on your title, tenant, you're renting the home of the Federal Reserve. You don't own it. But you can't pay off your mortgage with currency. Steam coming out your ears, yeah? Should be. And we haven't finished. The Fed also pledged unincorporated federal territories, now known as national parks. They also pledged all of your birth certificates and all non-profit organisations as collateral against the federal debt, which can never be paid off. You getting mad now? This is what's happening, folks. And this is why we have to get real. Put pressure on these clowns. They've stiffed every single one of you badly, myself included.
The New World Order War and Emergency Powers Acts and Executive Orders. A majority of the people of the United States have lived all of their lives under emergency rule. For 40 years, now 66 years, freedoms and governmental procedures guaranteed by the Constitution have, in varying degrees, been abridged by laws brought into force by states of national emergency. The problem of how a constitutional democracy reacts to great crises, however, far antedates the Great Depression. As a philosophical issue, its origins reach back to the Greek city-states and the Roman Republic. And, in the United States, actions taken by the government in times of great crises have, from, at least, the Civil War, in important ways, shaped the present phenomenon of a permanent state of national emergency. Since March 9, 1933, the United States has been in a state of declared national emergency. In fact, there are now in effect 4 presidentially proclaimed states of national emergency. In addition to the national emergency declared by President Roosevelt in 1933, there are also the national emergency proclaimed by President Truman on December 16, 1950, during the Korean conflict, and the states of national emergency declared by President Nixon on March 23, 1970, and August 15, 1971. These proclamations give force to 470 provisions of federal law, hundreds more since 1973, particularly in the Clinton administration since January 21, 1993. These hundreds of statutes delegate to the President extraordinary powers, ordinarily exercised by the Congress, which affect the lives of American citizens in a host of all-encompassing manners. This vast range of powers, taken together, confers enough authority to rule the country without reference to normal constitutional processes. Under the powers delegated by these statutes, the President may seize property, organize and control the means of production, seize commodities, assign military forces abroad, institute martial law, seize and control all transportation and communication, regulate the operation of private enterprise, restrict travel, and, in a plethora of particular ways, control the lives of all American citizens. When the Southern states walked out of Congress on March 27, 1861, the quorum to conduct business under the Constitution was lost. The only votes that Congress could lawfully take, under parliamentary law, were those to set the time to reconvene, take a vote to get a quorum, and vote to adjourn and set a date, time, and place to reconvene at a later time, but instead, Congress abandoned the House and Senate without setting a date to reconvene. Under the parliamentary law of Congress, when this happened, Congress became sine die, pronounced cnadia, literally, without day, and thus when Congress adjourned sine die, it ceased to exist as a lawful deliberative body, and the only lawful, constitutional power that could declare war was no longer lawful, or in session. The Southern states, by virtue of their secession from the Union, also ceased to exist sine die, and some state legislatures in the Northern Bloc also adjourned sine die, and thus, all the states which were parties to creating the Constitution ceased to exist. President Lincoln executed the first executive order written by any president on April 15, 1861, Executive Order 1, and the nation has been ruled by the president under executive order ever since. When Congress eventually did reconvene, it was reconvened under the military authority of the commander-in-chief and not by rules of order for parliamentary bodies or by constitutional law, placing the American people under martial rule ever since that national emergency declared by President Lincoln. The Constitution for the United States of America temporarily ceased to be the law of the land, and the President, Congress, and the courts unlawfully presumed that they were free to remake the nation in their own image, whereas, lawfully, no constitutional provisions were in place which afforded power to any of the actions which were taken which presumed to place the nation under the new form of control. President Lincoln knew that he had no authority to issue any executive order, and thus he commissioned General Orders No. 100 April 24, 1863 as a special field code to govern his actions under martial law and which justified the seizure of power, which extended the laws of the District of Columbia, and which fictionally implemented the provisions of Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 17 to 18 of the Constitution beyond the boundaries of Washington, D.C. and into the several states. General Orders No. 100, also called the Lieber Instructions and the Lieber Code, extended the laws of war and international law onto American soil, and the United States government became the presumed conqueror of the people and the land. Martial rule was kept secret and has never ended. The nation has been ruled under military law by the commander-in-chief of that military, the President, under his assumed executive powers and according to his executive orders. Constitutional law under the original Constitution is enforced only as a matter of keeping the public peace under the provisions of General Orders No. 100 under martial rule. Under martial law, title is a mere fiction, since all property belongs to the military except for that property which the commander-in-chief may, in his benevolence, exempt from taxation and seizure and upon which he allows the enemy to reside. President Lincoln was assassinated before he could complete plans for re-establishing constitutional government in the southern states and end the martial rule by executive order, and the 14th article in amendment to the Constitution created a new citizenship status for the new expanded jurisdiction. New laws for the District of Columbia were established and passed by Congress in 1871, supplanting those established February 27, 1801 and May 3, 1802. The District of Columbia was reincorporated in 1872, and all states in the Union were reformed as franchisees of the federal corporation so that a new Union of the United States could be created. The key to when the states became federal franchisees is related to the date when such states enacted the Field Code in law. The Field Code was a codification of the common law that was adopted first by New York and then by California in 1872, and shortly afterwards the Lieber Code was used to bring the United States into the 1874 Brussels Conference and into the Hague Conventions of 1899 and 1907. In 1917, the Trading with the Enemy Act, Public Law 65-91, 65th Congress, Session I, Chapters 105, 106, October 6, 1917, was passed and which defined, regulated and punished trading with enemies, who were then required by that act to be licensed by the government to do business. The National Banking System Act, Public Law 73-1, 73rd Congress, Session I, Chapter 1, March 9, 1933, Executive Proclamation 2038, March 6, 1933, Executive Proclamation 2039, March 9, 1933, and Executive Orders 6073, 6102, 6111 and 6260 prove that in 1933, the United States government formed under the executive privilege of the original martial rule went bankrupt, and a new state of national emergency was declared under which United States citizens were named as the enemy to the government and the banking system as per the provisions of the Trading with the Enemy Act. The legal system provided for in the Constitution was formally changed in 1938 through the Supreme Court decision in the case of Erie Railroad Co. v. Tompkins, 304 U.S. 64, 82 L. ed. 1188. On April 25, 1938, the Supreme Court overturned the standing precedents of the prior 150 years concerning common law in the federal government. There is no federal common law, and Congress has no power to declare substantive rules of common law applicable in a state, whether they be local or general in their nature, be they commercial law or a part of law of torts. See, Erie Railroad Co. v.s. Tompkins, 304 U.S. 64, 82 L. ed. 1188. The significance is that since the Erie decision, no cases are allowed to be cited that are prior to 1938. There can be no mixing of the old law with the new law. The common law is the fountain source of substantive and remedial rights, if not our very liberties. In 1945 the United States gave up any remaining national sovereignty when it signed the United Nations Treaty, making all American citizens subject to United Nations jurisdiction. The Constitution of the United Nations may be compared to that of the old Soviet Union.
So now let us recap exactly what happened to our unalienable rights during this season of treason. On February 21, 1871, under the guise of creating the seat of our government with the Organic Act of 1871, the legislative branch, through Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, creates a fully private and for-profit corporation that they control, and name it, believe it or not, the United States. Just prior to creating that private for-profit corporation, they, the legislative branch, put in place through military threat, the totally unlawful and never ratified 14th Amendment of July 28, 1868, that just happens to place every U.S. citizen squarely within the jurisdiction of their new company. A few years earlier, June 30, 1864, this same unlawful Congress redefined the word state through an Internal Revenue Act to mean the very same geographic area over which they had complete control and constitutional authority, the District of Columbia. And finally, to make sure the people were thoroughly confused, the very same unlawful and unconstitutional legislature through an earlier Internal Revenue Act redefined the word person to mean a non-living fictional entity, thus creating an artificial person under their control. In less than a decade, with the Civil War being nothing more than a smokescreen, our freedom and liberty was replaced with civil rights by our presumed consent to a misleading U.S. citizenship.
The Fictitious Legal Entity Called, a Person, February 14, 2010 by Paul Verge. Call. House, left, puppeteer of presidents, a quote, famously attributed to Rothschild agent Call. Edward House, but rarely understood except by one man in a million, envisages people as collateral on the national debt. Very soon, every American will be required to register their biological property in a national system designed to keep track of the people, and that will operate under the ancient system of pledging. By such methodology, we can compel people to submit to our agenda, which will affect our security as a chargeback for our fiat paper currency. Every American will be forced to register or suffer not being able to work and earn a living. They will be our chattel, and we will hold the security interest over them forever, by operation of the law merchant under the scheme of secured transactions. Americans, by unknowingly or unwittingly delivering the bills of lading to us, will be rendered bankrupt and insolvent, forever to remain economic slaves through taxation, secured by their pledges. They will be stripped of their rights and given a commercial value designed to make us a profit, and they will be none the wiser, for not one man in a million could ever figure our plans, and, if by accident one or two would figure it out, we have in our arsenal plausible deniability. After all, this is the only logical way to fund government, by floating liens and debt to the registrants in the form of benefits and privileges. This will inevitably reap to us huge profits beyond our wildest expectations and leave every American a contributor to this fraud, which we will call social insurance. 181. Without realizing it, every American will insure us for any loss we may incur, and in this manner, every American will unknowingly be our servant, however begrudgingly. The people will become helpless and without any hope for their redemption, and we will employ the high office of the president of our dummy corporation to foment this plot against America. If you can decipher what this means, you will truly understand a massive piece of the global agenda. Essentially, House's quote illuminates the multiple need for imposing legal person status upon us by the satanic, ego-worshipping elite. The strawman, also known as the legal person or natural person, is the idea that a fictitious legal entity, called a person, exists for purposes of law and commerce. This person is similar to a company or corporation in that it exists as a construct of the imagination, it has no real body, and no soul to save, but for legal purposes, carries similar rights and attributes to that of a human man or woman. These rights include ownership of property, lobbying the government, voting, and other activities related to money. The person allows us to function with limited liability, read, less responsibility. Our primary legal person, or ID card, consists of birth date, eye color, hair color, height, weight, and now fingerprints and retina scans, as if that's all we are. Nowhere on an ID card are your soul, or your personality, or your hopes, dreams, or capacity to love ever mentioned. The emotional insecurities we have about our bodies are magnified and exploited through constant propaganda and advertising, while our media hammers away at our psyche, reminding us that we are only bodies, that bodies can only be sexy or ugly, and that bodies and their parts must be regarded as possessions or objects to be owned. In addition, by registering, signing over to the state, your biological property, your body and the bodies of your children, creating a birth certificate, a financial security instrument representing proof of parental consent in signing over the child, you are thus consenting to the state's ownership of you and your children. The state then creates a child's very first legal person, with the parental signing of the birth certificate, which is given a commercial value. If you have an older style birth certificate, look on the reverse side of it to see 3 points of interest. 1. A 6 to 10 digit number that you have never used in your life. 2. The words revenue receipt on the left side of this number. 3. The words for treasury purposes only on the right side of the number. Incidentally, before the 1900s, people used to write the evidence of a birth in their family Bible. This first legal person attached to you is known as a national citizen, which later becomes synonymous with being a government employee. When you give in, an application to beg for registration to sign over your rights to become a sinner by signing up for the fraud called social insurance or social security. You then receive your employee ID hash, also known as a SIN hash, which creates another person called a taxpayer. This means you consent to the Income Tax Act, and now makes you liable for the income tax, in exchange for the benefits of being a government employee. The strawman, legal person is thus the evidence of your signature, an oath, and consent to obey a set of acts or statutes, usually located on paper contract, or in a card form with your signature. For example, you sign for a driver's license to create a legal person called a driver, and have consented to follow the traffic safety, motor vehicle acts of your state or province. You sign up for a bank account to create a legal person called an account holder, usually providing your SIN hash as part of your identification, which consents to allowing access to your bank account by court order to pay your income taxes by force. You sign up for voter registration to create legal person called a voter, which gets to vote for new employees and presidents, prime ministers for the corporation your person resides in, and thus consent to the actions of your representative and their party, even if it means going to war against an innocent foreign country, or proroguing their own parliament illegally. There are literally dozens, if not hundreds of different persons you can be holding, but none of them are you. Persons must reside within another legal entity, they cannot live anywhere. That is why you are asked if you are a resident of Canada or the United States. Authorities are not asking you, the living man or woman, if you live in the country, they are asking if your legal person resides, has the right to do business, work within their corporation. We have to know what words mean when people claiming authority try to use legal words to control us. Legal dictionaries are different than regular dictionaries, because legal words carry weight in law, and are often defined completely differently within various acts, statutes, and legal dictionaries. It is literally another language, which is why they call it legalese. Solutions only by realizing and discerning who we really are, powerful spiritual beings with unlimited creative potential created by God, can we break the first invisible chain keeping us from freedom. You can declare your rights and stand upon them as a sovereign man or woman by filing notices of understanding and intent and claims of right, example of both available on the web. You must tailor your own notices and claims to your own situation. It is not a simple cookie-cutter process. Standing upon your sovereignty in court and winning is factual, but you must not fall for their name game, where they try to get you to accept your legal name, which puts you in their jurisdiction. Doing that, in the eyes of the court, turns you from a living human with human rights, into a soulless corporate entity with no rights whatsoever. The best solution to win against the crooked and corrupt courts is to never go to court and play their fixed game at all. If someone tries to use a court order against you, make sure it is signed by a judge or it is invalid. Most court orders aren't actually signed, and officials use unsigned court orders as a confidence trick to gain your consent. There is no silver bullet. There is no lazy way to learn about your rights. You must research and do your homework to really learn what you are doing. Ignorantly walking into court is like playing carelessly with a loaded handgun. You are not a person. You are a living soul of flesh and blood. A person has privileges that can be revoked while a living man or woman has rights that are inalienable. Knowing this, is the first step to stopping the war against consciousness. The Two United States and the Law by Howard Freeman. Our forefathers, weary of the oppressive measures that King George III's government forced upon them, in common declared their independence from England in 1776. They were not expected to be successful in that resistance. The moneyed people had backed England for two major reasons. First, our forefathers wanted a rigid, written constitution set in concrete. They were familiar with the so-called Constitution of England, which consisted largely of customs, precedents, traditions, and understandings, often vague and always flexible. They wanted the principle of English common law, that an act done by any official person or law-making body beyond his or its legal competence was simply void. Second, the 13 little colonies desired to base their union on substance, gold and silver, real money. They well knew how the despotic governments of Europe were mortgaged to the hilt, lock, stock, and barrel, the land, the people, everything, to certain wealthy men who controlled the banks, the currency, and all credit, who lent credit but did not loan gold and silver. The United States of America was made up of a union of what is now 50 sovereign states, a three-branch legislative, executive, and judicial republic known as the United States of America, or as termed in this article, the continental United States. Its citizenry live in one of the 50 states, and its laws are based on the Constitution, which is based on common law. Less than 100 years after we became a nation, a loophole was discovered in the Constitution by cunning lawyers in league with the international bankers. They realized that a separate nation existed, by the same name, that Congress had created in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. This United States is a legislative democracy within the constitutional republic, and is known as the Federal United States. It has exclusive, unlimited rule over its citizenry, the residents of the District of Columbia, the territories and enclaves Guam, Midway Islands, Wake Island, Puerto Rico, etc., and anyone who is a citizen by way of the 14th Amendment, naturalized citizens. Both United States have the same Congress that rules in both nations. 1. United States, the Republic of 50 States, has the Stars and Stripes as its flag, but without any fringe on it. The federal United States flag is the Stars and Stripes with a yellow fringe, seen in all the courts. The abbreviations of the states of the continental United States are, with or without the zip codes, ALA, ALAS, ARIS, ARC, CAL, etc. The abbreviations of the states under the jurisdiction of the federal United States, the legislative democracy, are AL, AK, AS, R, CA, etc. without any periods. Under the Constitution, based on common law, the Republic of the Continental United States provides for legal cases 1 at law, 2 in equity, and 3 in admiralty. 1. Law is the collective organization of the individual right to lawful defense. It is the will of the majority, the organization of the natural right of lawful defense. It is the substitution of a common force for individual forces, to do only what the individual forces have a natural and lawful right to do, to protect persons, liberties, and properties, to maintain the right of each, and to cause justice to reign over us all. Since an individual cannot lawfully use force against the person, liberty, or property of another individual, then the common force, for the same reason, cannot lawfully be used to destroy the person, liberty, or property of individuals or groups. Law allows you to do anything you want to, as long as you don't infringe upon the life, liberty or property of anyone else. Law does not compel performance. Today's so-called laws, ordinances, statutes, acts, regulations, orders, precepts, etc. are often erroneously perceived as law, but just because something is called a law does not necessarily make it a law. There is a difference between legal and lawful. Anything the government does is legal, but it may not be lawful. 2. Equity is the jurisdiction of compelled performance for any contract you are a party to, and is based on what is fair in a particular situation. The term equity denotes the spirit and habit of fairness, justness, and right dealing which would regulate the intercourse of men with men. You have no rights other than what is specified in your contract. Equity has no criminal aspects to it. 3. Admiralty is compelled performance plus a criminal penalty, a civil contract with a criminal penalty. By 1938, the gradual merger procedurally between law and equity actions, i.e., the same court has jurisdiction over legal, equitable, and admiralty matters, was recognized. The nation was bankrupt and was owned by its creditors, the international bankers, who now owned everything: the Congress, the executive, the courts, all the states and their legislatures and executives, all the land, and all the people. Everything was mortgaged in the national debt. We had gone from being sovereigns over government to subjects under government, through the use of negotiable instruments to discharge our debts with limited liability, instead of paying our debts at common law with gold or silver coin. The remainder of this article explains how this happened, where we are today, and what remedy we have to protect ourselves from this system. Our present commercial system of law and the remedy provided for our protection. The present commercial system of law has replaced the old and familiar common law upon which our nation was founded. The following is the legal thread which brought us from sovereigns over government to subjects under government, through the use of negotiable instruments, Federal Reserve notes, to discharge our debts with limited liability instead of paying our debts at common law with gold or silver coin. The change in our system of law from public law to private commercial law was recognized by the Supreme Court of the United States in the Erie Railroad v. Tompkins case of 1938, after which case, in the same year, the procedures of law were officially blended with the procedures of equity. Prior to 1938, all U.S. Supreme Court decisions were based upon public law, or that system of law that was controlled by constitutional limitation. Since 1938, all U.S. Supreme Court decisions are based upon what is termed public policy. Public policy concerns commercial transactions made under the Negotiable Instruments Law, which is a branch of the international law merchant. This has been codified into what is now known as the Uniform Commercial Code, which system of law was made uniform throughout the 50 states through the cunning of the Congress of the United States, which United States has its origin in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution, as distinguished from the United States, which is the Union of the 50 states. In offering grants of negotiable paper, Federal Reserve notes, which the Congress gave to the 50 states of the Union for education, highways, health, and other purposes, Congress bound all the states of the Union into a commercial agreement with the federal United States, as distinguished from the continental United States. The 50 states accepted the benefits offered by the federal United States as the consideration of a commercial agreement between the federal United States and each of the corporate states. The corporate states were then obligated to obey the Congress of the federal United States and also to assume their portion of the equitable debts of the federal United States to the international banking houses, for the credit loaned. The credit which each state received, in the form of federal grants, was predicated upon equitable paper. This system of negotiable paper binds all corporate entities of government together in a vast system of 288. Commercial agreements, and is what has altered our court system from one under the common law to a legislative Article 1 court, or tribunal, system of commercial law. Those persons brought before this court are held to the letter of every statute of government on the federal, state, county, or municipal levels unless they have exercised the remedy provided for them within that system of commercial law whereby, when forced to use a so-called benefit offered, or available, to them, from government, they may reserve their former right, under the common law guarantee of same, not to be bound by any contract, or commercial agreement, that they did not enter knowingly, voluntarily, and intentionally. This is exactly how the corporate entities of state, county, and municipal governments got entangled with the legislative democracy, created by Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution, and called here the Federal United States, to distinguish it from the continental United States, whose origin was in the Union of the Sovereign States. The same National Congress rules the continental United States pursuant to constitutional limits upon its authority, while it enjoys exclusive rule, with no constitutional limitations, as it legislates for the federal United States. With the above information, we may ask, how did we, the free preamble citizenry of the sovereign states, lose our guaranteed unalienable rights and be forced into acceptance of the equitable debt obligations of the federal United States, and also become subject to that entity of government, and divorced from our sovereign states in the republic, which we call here the continental United States? We do not reside, work, or have income from any territory subject to the direct jurisdiction of the federal United States. These are questions that have troubled sincere, patriotic Americans for many years. Our lack of knowledge concerning the cunning of the legal profession is the cause of that divorce, but a knowledge of the truth concerning the legal thread, which caught us in its net, will restore our former status as a free preamble citizen of the Republic. The answer follows. Our National Congress works for two nations foreign to each other, and by legal cunning both are called the United States. One is the Union of Sovereign States, under the Constitution, termed in this article the Continental United States. The other is a legislative democracy which has its origin in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution, here termed the Federal United States. Very few people, when they see some law passed by Congress, ask themselves, which nation was Congress working for when it passed this or that so-called law? Or, few ask, does this particular law apply to the continental citizenry of the Republic, or does this particular law apply only to residents of the District of Columbia and other named enclaves, or territories, of the democracy called the Federal United States? Since these questions are seldom asked by the uninformed citizenry of the Republic, it was an open invitation for cunning political leadership to seek more power and authority over the entire citizenry of the Republic through the medium of legalese. Congress deliberately failed in its duty to provide a medium of exchange for the citizenry of the Republic, in harmony with its constitutional mandate. Instead, it created an abundance of commercial credit money for the legislative democracy, where it was not bound by constitutional limitations. Then, after having created an emergency situation, and a tremendous depression in the Republic, Congress used its emergency authority to remove the remaining substance, gold and silver, from the medium of exchange belonging to the Republic, and made the negotiable instrument paper of the legislative democracy, Federal United States, a legal tender for continental United States citizenry to use in the discharge of debts. At the same time, Congress granted the entire citizenry of the two nations the benefit of limited liability in the discharge of all debts by telling the citizenry that the gold and silver coins of the Republic were out of date and cumbersome. The citizens were told that gold and silver substance was no longer needed to pay their debts, that they were now privileged to discharge debt with this more convenient currency, issued by the Federal United States. Consequently, everyone was forced to go modern, and to turn in their gold as a patriotic gesture. The entire news media complex went along with the scam and declared it to be a forward step for our democracy, no longer referring to America as a republic. From that time on, it was a falling light for the Republic of 1776, and a rising light for Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal democracy, which overcame the Depression, which was caused by a created shortage of real money. There was created an abundance of debt paper money, so-called, in the form of interest-bearing negotiable instrument paper called Federal Reserve Notes, and other forms of paperwork credit instruments. Since all contracts since Roosevelt's time have the colorable consideration of Federal Reserve Notes, instead of a genuine consideration of silver and gold coin, all contracts are colorable contracts, and not genuine contracts. According to Black's Law Dictionary 1990, colorable means that which is in appearance only, and not in reality, what it purports to be, hence counterfeit, feigned, having the appearance of truth. Consequently, a new colorable jurisdiction, called a statutory jurisdiction, had to be created to enforce the contracts. Soon the term colorable contract was changed to the term commercial agreement to fit circumstances of the new statutory jurisdiction, which is legislative, rather than judicial, in nature. This jurisdiction enforces commercial agreements upon implied consent, rather than full knowledge, as it is with the enforcement of contracts under the common law. All of our courts today sit as legislative tribunals, and the so-called statutes of legislative bodies being enforced in these legislative tribunals are not statutes passed by the legislative branch of our three-branch republic, but as commercial obligations to the federal United States for anyone in the federal United States or in the continental United States who has used the equitable currency of the federal United States and who has accepted the benefit, or privilege, of discharging his debts with the limited liability benefit offered to him by the federal United States, except those who availed themselves of the remedy within this commercial system of law, which remedy is today found in Book 1 of the Uniform Commercial Code at Section 207. When used in conjunction with one's signature, a stamp stating "without prejudice UCC 1-207" is sufficient to indicate to the magistrate of any of our present legislative tribunals, called courts, that the signer of the document has reserved his common law right. He is not to be bound to the statute, or commercial obligation, of any commercial agreement that he did not enter knowingly, voluntarily, and intentionally, as would be the case in any common law contract. Furthermore, pursuant to UCC 1-103, the statute, being enforced as a commercial obligation of a commercial agreement, must now be construed in harmony with the old common law of America, where the tribunal court must rule that the statute does not apply to the individual who is wise enough and informed enough to exercise the remedy provided in this new system of law. He retains his former status in the Republic and fully enjoys his unalienable rights, guaranteed to him by the Constitution of the Republic, while those about him curse the darkness of commercial law government, lacking the truth needed to free themselves from a slave status under the federal United States, even while inhabiting territory foreign to its territorial venue. Addendum. UCC 1-207, Sufficiency of reservation. Any expression indicating any intention to preserve rights is sufficient, such as without prejudice, under protest, under reservation, or with reservation of all our rights. 290. The Code states an explicit reservation must be made. Explicit undoubtedly is used in place of express to indicate that the reservation must not only be express, but it must also be clear that such a reservation was intended. The term explicit as used in UCC 1-207 means that which is so clearly stated or distinctively set forth that there is no doubt as to its meaning. UCC 1-207-7 Effect of reservation of rights. The making of a valid reservation of rights preserves whatever rights the person then possesses and prevents the loss of such right by application of concepts of waiver or estoppel. UCC 1-207-9 Failure to make reservation. When a waivable right or claim is involved, the failure to make a reservation thereof causes a loss of the right and bars its assertion at a later date. UCC 1-103-6 Common Law. The Code is complementary to the common law which remains in force except where displaced by the Code. A statute should be construed in harmony with the common law unless there is a clear legislative intent to abrogate the common law. The Code cannot be read to preclude a common law action. Beware the leader who bangs the drums of war in order to whip the citizenry into a patriotic fervor, for patriotism is indeed a double-edged sword. It both emboldens the blood, just as it narrows the mind. And when the drums of war have reached a fever pitch and the blood boils with hate and the mind has closed, the leader will have no need in seizing the rights of the citizenry. Rather, the citizenry, infused with fear and blinded by patriotism, will offer up all of their rights unto the leader, and gladly so. How do I know? For this is what I have done. And I am Caesar. Julius Caesar.
The following report is the product of decades of study and researching the inner workings of the United States federal government. Some of these historical facts and political realities may be completely unknown to the listener. However, they need to be considered very seriously in view of the critical state of our republic. The President of the United States is actually the President of the United States Corporation. As such, this government corporate entity has a board of directors which is completely hidden. This clandestine board of directors in turn answers to a governing body which itself also answers to a level of leadership that's even further removed from the public's awareness. It's been this way since the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, when the Fed took control, full control, of the United States federal government. Before that historic and hapless event, there were other hidden controls firmly in place on the office of the US presidency. So what's the point? In even the best of worlds, given the highly constraining institutional arrangements, the President, Donald Trump, can only accomplish so much. Given the extremely powerful and pervasive forces vastly arrayed against him, he can do even less. In light of the exceedingly polarized political climate, the President's job just became that much more difficult. And it's important to understand that the so-called Democrats are really communists, they're socialists, they're Bolsheviks in disguise. With this vital understanding, even if President Trump had every intention of carrying out his Make America Great Again agenda, it was nearly impossible to do so, as it is today. President Trump also knows in his heart of hearts that his first job was to completely demolish Obama's legacy. It's literally impossible to build a new republic with rogue states operating at full tilt on both the left coast, in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and the east coast, New York City and Washington, D.C. With these exceptionally powerful political, economic, and financial power centers fighting him tooth and nail every second of every day, what can he possibly accomplish with lasting effect? President Trump has done his job. He's finished with his primary presidential task. Now it's time for we the people to play our vital parts. It's politically impossible for the president to achieve his major goals with a Democrat-controlled House. He knows that. The president is also doing a great job at telegraphing to the patriot movement, the nationalists, the conservatives, the Christians, the libertarians, and independents, that his hands are tied, and that he desperately needs our help. He needs serious people power beneath his wings, more than ever. Given what has just occurred over the past few weeks, it ought to be really obvious that the president has been put into a veritable vice grip. Even before he walked into the Oval Office, President Trump was forced to agree to some very real terms and conditions to holding high office, which is why Obama still is out on the streets. For example, the shadow government even went so far as to make Trump sign a confidential contract which they can and will enforce in any number of ways. The powers that be won't even let him near the White House until he signs this secret contract. That contract includes a strict promise not to prosecute any former president for war crimes or any other high crimes and misdemeanors. As a matter of fact, every single United States president since John F. Kennedy has been forced to sign such a contract, which is only broken on pain of death. This is just one clause of the highly classified secret contract executed between the CEO, President, and the United States Corporation. There are other significant terms and conditions that prevent President Trump from executing his most basic duties, as well as implementing key aspects of his Make America Great Again agenda. It's quite likely that Trump was unaware of many of these restrictions and stipulations before he decided to run for office. But none of these artificial constraints on the president are legitimate in any sense of the word. Therefore, President Trump is fully empowered to throw off the yoke of the shadow government and international banking cartel. However, he first requires a critical mass of patriots to fully support him. The president's first order of business in really draining that swamp is to demolish the central pillar. That would be the CIA-controlled media. Once that demolition takes place, everything changes in a day and a night. However, there's a huge caveat to that absolute necessity. President Trump will be incapacitated if he crosses the line. Think about it. The West Wing is literally a bullpen for agents of the swamp and shadow government operatives. The powers that be can physically restrain the president at almost any moment and totally get away with it. In other words, if the president gives an order to, for example, arrest George Soros as a traitor to our republic, it would be quite easy for that order to be immediately put into a circular file. If the president were to tweet it out, the order would be preemptively deleted. If President Trump were to give a public address on any given national news platform, it would be time-delayed and then erased. Should Trump use a live platform to speak directly to the American people in real time, he would be rustled off the stage under the pretext of an assassination threat, and then immediately injected so as to effectively incapacitate him. There have already been public appearances that President Trump has made since his inauguration day, where it was evident that he had been drugged. The bottom line is that the president is on a very short leash, and the White House is the most monitored prison in the world. The president's options moving forward have been severely limited, as the cancellation of the State of the Union address clearly illustrates. That's also because there is a slow-motion soft coup in progress. The president has performed his primary function within the context of the Second American Revolution. President Trump exposed the New World Order globalist cabal that insidiously stole our nation over decades of subversion, sabotage, and sedition. For example, because of Trump's Twitter content, we now know that the media is the enemy of the people. But now, we need to take some responsibility. We need to take responsibility and get rid of the traitors to the Republic, wherever they infest the United States government, the mainstream media, and other powerful institutions in our society. The president can't do this alone. He never could, because this is our responsibility. This is the responsibility of every U.S. citizen. We let the globalist perpetrators steal our country, and only we can take it back from them. This grave responsibility now falls squarely on the shoulders of every living United States citizen. We are currently at the point where it's either us or the globalists. And if the Democrats win in 2020, it's over. I've been saying that for a while. Truly, it'll be over for the United States of America that was conceived by our great founding fathers. Should the listener fail to apprehend this stark reality, take a look at what's going on in California. So let's get busy. Let's take back our country before the Bolsheviks take what little freedoms and few rights are left for us to defend ourselves. They must be removed from their positions of power and influence. They must be removed. For Headlines with a Voice, this is Nancy Morgan Hart.